Second Chronicles is another one of those books in the Bible that should be rated R. Kids should not be reading this book. There's violence, there's war. It's all in Second Chronicles. It gets pretty nasty. It goes from this united monarchy under Solomon to a divided monarchy under Solomon's son Rehoboam and this guy Jeroboam, who have this kind of civil war thing going on, to Assyria taking over the northern kingdom of Israel, and eventually to Babylon taking over the southern kingdom of Judah. And in the end, you get this glimmer of hope that we will get at. But I think the interpretive key to this book is right in the beginning, when Solomon has this experience of God coming to him, and God says, "Solomon, you can ask for anything that you want and I will give it to you. It's yours." And Solomon thinks about this and he says, "Well, I'd really like some wisdom. How about that?" And God says, "Wow, that's great. I'm so glad that you asked for wisdom. Since you didn't ask for wealth, honor, prestige, the death of your enemies, I will give you all of that. I will give you honor, wealth, and prestige." But God leaves out the death of your enemies. Man, if I'm Solomon, I'm like, dude, you missed one. How about the death of my enemies? I'd really like that. But that's not what God says. And here you get this unraveling that the Bible is trying to do. It tries to unravel our idea of a violent God. God has nothing to do with violence in this passage with Solomon. Now, it is true that throughout much of the rest of Second Chronicles, God seems to be enmeshed in human violence. God is with Judah in their wars. But I think that there's a way to interpret this. Throughout the Bible, if you've been following along in these classes, you have this thrust, this exodus from Egypt, geographically, spiritually, and politically. God says, don't go back to Egypt. Solomon, I want to argue, brings Israel back to Egypt. And this is the whole problem of Second Chronicles, that Second Chronicles is trying to bring about. Solomon forces people into labor in order to build the temple. Solomon buys chariots and horses from where else? Egypt. Solomon is going right back into Egypt. And you really get this sense of injustice, of oppression, when the Queen of Sheba comes and visits Solomon. She comes to Solomon and she says, she sees everything that Solomon has, and he's got more wealth than anybody in the world and more honor than anybody in the world. And she says, God has made you king of Israel in order to provide justice. It doesn't say that Solomon does provide justice, but in order that Solomon provide justice. And Solomon doesn't. He just goes right back to the ways of Egypt and oppression. And you see this with his son Rehoboam. When Rehoboam becomes king, Jeroboam comes back up from the place where he found safety, Egypt, comes back up from Egypt and says to Rehoboam, I ran away because your father oppressed us with this slave labor. Will you not oppress us, please? Will you bring us into freedom? And Rehoboam goes to his older advisors and they say, yeah, you probably shouldn't oppress him. Well, Rehoboam doesn't like that. So then he goes to his younger advisors, and his younger advisors say, oppress them. Just make them work harder and harder and harder. And so that's what Rehoboam does. And you get into this civil war because of oppression, and the whole rest of the Bible is this going back to Egypt, back to the way of oppression, back to the God of violence that gets critiqued right in the beginning of the book. Now, you have this separation, the divided monarchy, and you have these other kingdoms coming in and taking over. But at the end of the book, you have this hope that God has not left us yet. The God of the Exodus has not left us yet. And you have this hope that Cyrus, the king of Persia, will allow us to go back to our homeland in Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So, that's what Second Chronicles is dealing with, this desire to go back to the ways of Egypt, and it's critiquing it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know.